Well, five veteran women Indigenous journalists have come together to launch a new national association for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis storytellers. Now, the Indigenous Media Association of Canada, or IMAC, was formally incorporated this month. Eden Fineday is the publisher of Indigenous. She is a co-founding member of IMAC. She's been good enough to join us on the line this morning from Tsawwassen. Good morning to you, Eden.
That's Hey, Stephen. How are you? Good
Uh,
morning.
I'm very well, thank you. Always great to talk with you. Tell me about this new association and how it all came together.
Well, actually, which is a group of Indigenous journalists. We've been chatting for a few months on WhatsApp saying, we need a national body to represent us as a sector. Everyone else seems to have their associations. We've never had one in Canada. And as you know, journalism, it's facing some challenges right now.
Struggling,
So I
yeah.
think it hasn't been a great couple of decades for journalism. But yeah, we finally came together in late December and just decided it's time. Let's launch it. We want to advocate and represent on the federal level and nationally. Just advocate for all Indigenous journalists and broadcasters.
And when it comes to other organizations that represent journalists, the CAJ, for instance, do you think the Canadian Association of Journalists, has there not been a place for Indigenous people?
Technically, there's been a place. I'm a member of the CAJ. I totally support it. I think most Canadian journalists and broadcasters are members.
Yes.
And there has been obviously voiced support. But what we needed is our own table. Like often we are invited to a seat on other people's tables, and we appreciate that. But we needed to build our own table in our own way because we have such unique needs, and we're such a small group. We wanted to we needed to advocate
Right.
for ourselves with our own voice. Uh-huh.
There is an Indigenous Journalists Association based in the United States. Was there any discussion about having a northern chapter of that?
Yes, there definitely was. At first, I think that's what we thought we were going to do. I love the Indigenous Journalists Association. They're amazing. I go to their conferences. They do really good work. But they can't advocate for us nationally because they're not based in Canada. They're not incorporated in Canada to participate in federal programs or to work with certain federal departments. Um, the government needs a body that's based here. So we had to register and incorporate in Canada to really truly be able to do the work that we need to do for that kind of relationship with the government.
Hmm. And so this is just the beginning. Then I imagine you're still working out a lot. What do you or how I guess do you hope this will help Indigenous journalists and promote their work and get their work out there to a wider audience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope that we can support current journalists and broadcasters, help them feel validated, help them get funding, uh, provide opportunities for supports and networking. We'd love to have a conference someday. Who knows? Maybe someday we'll have awards. But basically, at the most basic level, we want to just be here, support other journalists and broadcasters, and say, we see you, we hear you, we know it's a struggle. Let's come together. We understand each other because we're, as Indigenous people, we've all faced very similar issues in our culture. So yeah, we'll just have a place where we can support each other and hopefully inspire future journalists, future broadcasters, future media entrepreneurs who are Indigenous.
And tell me a little bit about some of the other women you've been working with.
Oh my God, they are so incredible. I feel so grateful to have known them. But we're working with a few women across the country. So one of them is Carrie Benjo. She's the publisher of Eagle Feather News, based out of Saskatchewan. We're working with Maureen Gugu. She's the publisher, the solopreneur of Gugu Quace News in Nova Scotia. And then, of course, there's Francine Compton, who is the vice president of the IJA in the United States. And she's used to be at APTN. I'm not actually sure. I think she works for IJA now in the States.
Uh-huh.
There's me. Yeah. And I feel like oh, yeah. And then Catherine Ross, who is a media broadcaster from the interior. She's from Victoria, actually. But yeah, so that's the five of us who came together in December and decided to launch this endeavor.
Um, it's amazing that and this happens to be all women as well. Is there? Do you think? What would you say is the single biggest barrier to getting Indigenous stories and Indigenous journalism, platformed?
You need to advocate for that kind of thing. And I think, like, I feel like the reason we're finally able to create this organization right now is because we're just at the point where our recovery from colonialism has given us the capacity to do such a thing. I think for most of the past few hundred years, we've been struggling to survive, and you can't really you can't do more than the absolute the minimal, necessary to do unless you have like your basic needs met. And we're just at that point, kind of like Jeremy Dutcher talking about an Indigenous renaissance. It's like
Mm,
we're finally healed enough where we have some free time where we can actually meet with each other. I think technology has helped being able to Zoom or to have these meetings or to have our WhatsApp chain or whatever where we can share ideas really easily across the country has helped. But yeah, I think it's been difficult for folks to get organized until now. And I think maybe too, as Indigenous women, like it's traditionally it's been our role to care for the whole community. Um, and I think for us, we take that responsibility really. It's a sacred duty to us. We take it seriously.
Eden, we're also living through a time where, we see resources for journalism depleting, especially when it comes to journalism in smaller local markets. Some
Hmm.
towns have entirely lost their newspapers and their radio stations have gone quiet. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, we're also in a time when people seem to think that fact checking is somehow a bias. Um, how are you navigating those two things?
I mean, it's insane what's happening with journalism right now. Like it's heartbreaking when you hear of those small community papers or
Yeah,
those small community radio stations that have been there for decades. They're the lifeblood of that town, and there's just no money to be made thanks to the internet, and also we haven't been able to adapt quickly enough to technology or what have you. But it's heartbreaking. All I can say is I hope that we can at least help sustain and support the outlets that are currently up and running in Indigenous communities or for Indigenous communities. And maybe we are also part of towns and villages, and we our reserves are next to towns in a
of
lot of
course.
cases. Who knows? Maybe the work we do, the things we do, can support the whole area. But there was what was the second half of your question?
Well, the second half was about fact checking. Finding reliable
Mm,
sources of
mm,
information now, and
yeah.
what's moved into that empty space is, to be frank, a lot of garbage.
Hmm. I don't know. I feel like as a Cree woman, I feel like I've been taught that telling the truth is not just sort of like a virtue. It's a core tenet of our culture. We call it a natural law, and that's tapwe win, and that means the act of telling the truth. Um, for us, like in my culture, that's about being a reliable witness,
Yeah.
having integrity in your storytelling, and I feel like Indigenous people, our word was always it meant everything to us. Like the words we spoke, they had to be truthful, they had to be respectful. That was our diplomacy. We didn't
Hmm.
use the written word in most Indigenous cultures. I feel like there might be, um, in our communities at least, an understanding that we are trustworthy,
Right.
um, that is sort of a part of our cultures.
Hmm.
Not to speak for all Indigenous cultures, but I feel like we are uniquely positioned to to bring stories because we have this tradition of having integrity in our storytelling.
Eden, it's so good to hear you this morning. Thank you for the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephen. Take care.
Okay, you too. Great to see you. Bye bye. That's Eden Fineday, publisher of Indigenous, co founding member of the Indigenous Media Association of Canada.